Our story begins with a smart high school girl with an intense, studious aura that surrounds her who absolutely despises all men, as she believes that since the dawn of time men have only ever had one thing on their minds and our stupid monkey brains prevent us from thinking about anything other than developing plot. This hatred of all men is only exacerbated by her father, Japan's most famous writer of plot-heavy Susi novels, if you know what I mean. As such, she has a profound hatred for all men, and all she cares about now is studying hard so she can go to a good university and have a life free from her father and from all men. But all this changes when she meets the irresistible Riz demon Takumi, a popular boy in her class who, for some reason, always approaches Ao and tries to talk to her, but she just bluntly responds by asking him to go away as she sees through his nice guy routine and knows that his true intention is to make her fall in love so the two can finally push their Minecraft beds together. Meanwhile, Takumi's friends snicker at yet another failed attempt to approach Ao as she walks out of the classroom, determined to continue only focusing on her studies, leaving Takumi to conclude that she must really hate him after all, but his classmates reassure him that Ao doesn't get along with anyone, not just Takumi. When Ao then arrives home, her father greets her by immediately complaining and throwing a tantrum until Ao prepares him his favorite dessert, which obviously just fuels her hatred of men even further. But when Ao tells her father that she's not in the mood to be around men tonight, he somehow interprets this as her being in heat, as any reasonable father would, and sets a plan in motion to help her out. The next day, Ao thinks about all the plot-worthy ideas Takumi clearly has bubbling under that mop of hair, and decides that in order to prevent him from interfering with her very important studies any further, she'll woman up and tell him in no uncertain terms that she absolutely hates him. Later that day during gym class, when their sports teacher tells Ao to go to the infirmary to check on Takumi, who sprained his ankle, Ao sees this as a perfect opportunity to crush Takumi's heart and his tiny katana too if the situation calls for it. When Ao then arrives at the infirmary, she's surprised to find Takumi blushing and averting his gaze upon seeing her, and she suddenly finds it a bit harder to tell him to go eat dirt. However, she once again thinks about how all men are despicable trash and regains the confidence to go through with her plan. But just as she's about to hit him with the truth, she suddenly spots her father in the window with signs encouraging her to develop plot with Takumi, and in a moment of panic, she throws herself on top of Takumi in a desperate attempt to avert his eyes from Ao's father, but just ends up giving him a much better view instead. Afterwards, the two are visibly nervous and feel too awkward to even make eye contact. But just as Ao once again regains the courage to go through with her plan, her father hits her with Operation Melon Drop, suddenly exposing his own daughter's plot to Takumi. But in a surprising twist of events, instead of pouncing on her like Ao expects, Takumi simply covers her up and immediately confesses that he loves her. And in that moment, Ao is so shocked that Takumi didn't just go full monkey mode like she expects all men to do that she doesn't know how to respond and is petrified by the sheer shock of the moment. On the way home afterwards, Ao barely remembers what happened after the confession and has no idea about how to respond to Takumi as she's still uncertain if his intentions are genuine. The next morning, Ao is still obsessing over what to say to Takumi, so she hatches a brilliant plan to change her appearance so drastically that Takumi won't find her attractive anymore. But the next day, to her surprise, everyone loves her new look, and Takumi is even more attracted to this studious version of Ao. Realizing her plan has backfired spectacularly, Ao decides to switch things up again, determined to make herself look as ugly as the average harem main character. But Takumi suddenly shows up, and the two soon find themselves alone on the rooftop talking. But when Takumi, exhausted from all the drama, starts to doze off, Ao thinks this is the perfect opportunity to sneak a peek at his tiny katana to see how big it is. So she inches closer little by little with curiosity getting the better of her, but just as she's about to grab his wizard's staff, Takumi catches her in the act. But realizing just how big Takumi's hand is, Ao concludes that his sushi roll must be enormous too, and accidentally blurts out that she can't date Takumi because there's simply not enough space inside her. Y'all need Jesus. However, Takumi completely misunderstands and responds that you can't be sure until you try, which Ao interprets as him wanting to merge plots together, and with her mind on a one-way track to jail, Ao says she'll think about it. Back at home, Ao's father decides to give his daughter a helping hand in her new relationship by gifting her a stack of dating books, which she immediately destroys the next day. Ao is still confused about the previous day's events, so to calm down she starts reading only to realize that the book in her hands is one of her father's most US novels. Meanwhile, Takumi approaches Ao, eager to study together with his new English book, but Ao, lost in her own wild imagination, panics and accidentally flings her book at his, and the two end up inadvertently swapping books. Takumi, thinking he has somehow upset Ao, apologizes, while Ao is too flustered to say anything. Later that day, Ao realizes that she's holding Takumi's book instead of her dad's steamy novel and rushes to find Takumi. Thankfully, she catches up to him before he leaves. They sit together on a bench, and Ao, believing Takumi has already peeked into the inappropriate book, is convinced Takumi now wants to do something inappropriate right there in public, and she awkwardly suggests they shouldn't because people might see. But Takumi, completely oblivious and thinking she's talking about studying, responds that he thinks it's fine to do it outside, which completely shocks Ao. She immediately demands that he return the book to her, but Takumi playfully refuses as he admits that she's so cute that he simply can't help wanting to tease her. But eventually, Takumi hands back the book and suggests they study English together later, and it's only then that Ao realizes Takumi never even cracked open her father's book, leaving her mortified over her earlier comments. To make matters worse, later that night, Ao is dreading the upcoming school trip because she's sure it'll lead to all sorts of awkwardness with Takumi, but her father insists she goes, secretly hoping this will be a perfect opportunity for Ao to reenact scenes from his books. What the heck? On the day of the school trip, Ao is incredibly nervous as she's convinced her classmates are going to rope her into doing adult things. But just as her mind spins out of control, she bumps into Takumi, and in a panic, she distances herself because he makes her heart race like crazy. Takumi, on the other hand, finds her shy antics absolutely adorable, but his comment doesn't go unnoticed as Ao's classmates overhear and immediately swarm her, demanding to know what's going on between her and Takumi. But while running away, this anxious idiot accidentally walks into the wrong room just as Takumi's friends show up, putting Ao in full panic mode as she now has no choice but to hide in the closet. But when the friend head out to grab some drinks, Takumi is left alone in the room, and when he opens the closet, he's shocked to find Ao crammed inside for some reason that could only make sense to aliens. To make matters worse, Takumi unintentionally flusters Ao on her way out of the closet, causing her to stumble and fall right on top of him just as all the others walk back in. Flustered, Ao blurts out that it's not what it looks like, but no one really believes her. Later that night, everyone gathers for a test of courage, and the girls hatch a devious plan to pair Ao and Takumi together in hopes of giving them some alone time to pursue their impure desires. But as they walk, Ao suddenly feels the urgent need to pee, and just as she's about to relieve herself, she feels a mysterious hand touch her, which immediately freaks her out, and Ao bolts back to Takumi. But when Takumi bravely goes out to investigate, he discovers it was nothing supernatural after all. But just then Takumi notices that Ao's skirt is lifted and tries to discreetly hint at it. But Ao has no idea what he's trying to say and instead mistakenly thinks Takumi is dropping hints about her behind, leaving Ao now convinced that Takumi is obsessed with her thick bakery. Nice. Feeling mortified and overwhelmed, Ao immediately runs off, but Takumi stops her and offers her his jacket to cover up. Ao misinterprets this and thinks he's gesturing her to undress as well, causing her to dash off once again, only to fall and accidentally twist her ankle in the process. Takumi gallantly helps her up, and in a rare moment of sincerity, tells her she's special to him. Ao, thinking things are finally taking a romantic turn, expects a kiss, only for Takumi to cover her with his jacket and awkwardly point out that her skirt has been lifted this whole time, leaving Ao completely speechless. Sometime later, in a flashback, we see a young Ao being teased relentlessly by her classmates who would all constantly mock her every day, except for one person who defended her. Back to the present, Ao jolts awake from a nightmare, only to be greeted by the sight of her father who strolls in and hands her a letter. But when Ao opens it, she's shocked to find a picture of Takumi cozying up to another girl, and to make matters worse, Ao's father drops the bombshell that the very girl in the photo was the one who just handed him the letter, and if Ao wasn't already fuming. This little detail sends her straight into a jealous spiral later at school as she imagines having to reluctantly share her beloved Takumi with another girl. But later that day, while Ao is busy admiring how cool Takumi looks, the girls nearby start gushing about how great it is that Ao has a handsome athletic boyfriend, which she of course immediately denies. But things take a turn for the absurd when one of Takumi's friends pops up out of nowhere and starts teasing Takumi about being too handsome to date just one girl, and Ao's jealousy meter immediately shoots through the roof. With a cold voice, she tells Takumi never to speak to her again before storming off and promising to dedicate her life only to studying from now on. Later that day, Ao finds herself stuffing cake down her throat, hoping this might ease her suffering, but while thinking about the photo of Takumi with another girl, she feels an irresistible urge to tear it into confetti-sized pieces when suddenly Miyabi appears, the girl from the photo, and an old classmate of Ao who reveals that she was on that group date with Takumi. But here's where things get juicy. Miyabi reveals that during the date Takumi confessed that he likes Ao, and Miyabi found his honesty utterly irresistible, and now she's decided that she wants Takumi all to herself. Without hesitation, she boldly asks Ao if she can have him, as she confesses that she actually can't stand girls like Ao who have a great guy but seem clueless about it. Just as the tension reaches its peak, Ao suddenly receives a phone call from Takumi, who quickly explains that he was just forced into that group date, practically begging for her forgiveness. But Ao simply responds that it doesn't matter since they're not officially dating, and that he's probably just toying with her feelings anyway. In response, Takumi, hurt and frustrated, agrees never to talk to her again and abruptly hangs up, leaving both of them equally heartbroken even though the photo of Takumi with Miyabi was actually photoshopped. The next day, Takumi takes his words to heart and starts giving Ao the cold shoulder, and to make matters worse, Ao notices Miyabi trying to cozy up to Takumi at every opportunity. When Ao then asks her father why boys typically lose interest in a girl, her father replies that men lose interest when girls doubt a man's feelings or when they meet a cute girl willing to go all the way, which immediately sends Ao into panic mode. Sometime later, Ao and her father decide to go to a local fair together but stumble upon Takumi and Miyabi there as well, who are clearly on a date, and as if that wasn't enough, throughout the date, Miyabi follows some sort of bizarre dating manual which was actually written by Ao's father. Afterwards, Takumi and Ao somehow find themselves stumbling into a haunted house, but due to the dim lighting and eerie sound effects, they have no idea who the other person is, and as they shuffle through the haunted halls, they start gushing about their love interests, each trying to outdo the other in the bragging department. But when lightning strikes, they finally see each other's faces. While Ao mistakenly believes Takumi was previously gushing about Miyabi, Takumi mistakenly believes Ao is already on a date with her new boy toy, and the two immediately leave angry, leaving behind an air of awkwardness so thick that even the monsters start feeling uncomfortable. Later that day, Miyabi, never one to miss an opportunity for some sly manipulation, starts telling Takumi some nonsense about Ao being the kind of girl who has an army of simps and constantly moves from one guy to the next. Suddenly, Miyabi confesses that she's in love with Takumi and runs into his arms just as Ao appears in the distance to witness this. And because the universe loves drama, she watches in disbelief as Takumi and Miyabi disappear through the hotel doors. Later that night, Ao soaks in the bath, but instead of relaxing, she's imagining all the awful things Takumi and Miyabi are probably doing in that hotel. And as if things couldn't get worse, Ao faints from the heat. Just then, Takumi magically appears out of nowhere with the use of instant transmission, I assume. And when Ao finally wakes up all confused, she wonders why Takumi is there instead of being off with Miyabi. But before he can answer, her dad suddenly pops in and informs that Takumi showed up to check up on her, and he roped Takumi into carrying her like some sort of romantic hero. But Ao is still angry and immediately goes off on Takumi by accusing him of being some kind of two-timing idiot and tells him to just go back to the hotel with Miyabi. But Takumi, trying to keep his cool, explains that they did try to enter the hotel to get some rest but were turned away for being students, and while waiting outside, Takumi mentioned Ao would send Miyabi storming off in a huff. But since Ao still doesn't believe him, Takumi insists he's never done anything inappropriate in his life before immediately bolting off in embarrassment, leaving Ao completely flabbergasted. The next day at school, a storm is raging outside, but Ao couldn't care less as she's practically skipping with joy at the thought of being more experienced than Takumi since she has her father's expertise on her side. Later that day, Takumi and Ao both head to a cafe to study English, but things take a turn when Takumi, trying to impress Ao, says something wildly suggestive in English which makes Ao's face turn red, while Takumi, of course, has no clue what he just said, and it turns out the English book he's using is another gem from her father's collection. On the way back home, the conversation somehow drifts into the realm of impure desires, and Ao, now feeling like she's got the upper hand, can't help but brag a little. But when Takumi casually mentions that adult stuff must be old news for someone like her, Ao nervously blurts out that no, she's actually just as inexperienced as Takumi, and before he can respond, she bursts into tears and immediately runs off. Later, back at the cafe, Miyabi is calmly sipping her coffee when Ao suddenly bursts in, and while Miyabi braces herself thinking Ao is there to laugh at her for being rejected by Takumi, Ao instead throws her arms around Miyabi and confesses that she's terrified of guys like Takumi, leaving Miyabi utterly bewildered. The next day, Ao is absolutely mortified that Takumi has uncovered her biggest secret, that she's never done anything even remotely adult. Meanwhile, her father is off in his own world meditating under a waterfall, like some kind of literary monk trying to conjure up inspiration for his next novel. Just then, Yabe, an editor and her dad's longtime friend, shows up looking like he hasn't slept a wink from anxiously waiting for the new novel to be done, but Yabe insists it's no big deal and instead just invites Ao and her father to a meat festival that's filled with plot, because anime. While at the festival, Ao surprisingly bumps into Miyabi and is shocked to find her working there, but Miyabi, on the other hand, wastes no time telling Ao that she really doesn't fit in at a place like this. Just then, Takumi shows up revealing that he's working alongside Miyabi, and Ao's jealousy meter skyrockets when she hears Takumi call Miyabi by her first name while he still addresses her like it's a business transaction. Yabe arrives shortly after, and Miyabi's eyes light up as she finds him quite handsome. But when Yabe then casually calls Ao by her first name and introduces himself as her father's partner, Takumi becomes visibly annoyed and warns Yabe that he's being a bit too familiar with his precious Ao. But in response, Yabe just grins and says that he and Ao will have a fantastic relationship, which only makes Takumi even more jealous. But before things can get any more heated, Miyabi swoops in and drags Takumi back to work. As Yabe watches them go, he remarks to Ao that those two seem like a great couple, a comment which leaves Ao completely destroyed. Later at Takumi's workplace, he's unable to shake off what happened with Yabe and Ao, despite Miyabi's best efforts to snap him out of it. Meanwhile, Ao is so lost in thoughts about Takumi and Miyabi as a couple that she ends up losing Yabe and has no idea where he went. But just when panic starts to set in, she bumps into Takumi, who happens to be on his break, and not wanting to waste time, Takumi immediately asks Ao how close she and Yabe really are, but just then Yabe swoops back in, announcing it's time to return home since they've gathered enough new material for her dad's book. But Takumi, in a sudden burst of courage, grabs Ao by the arm and calls her by her first name, which embarrasses her deeply. He then spontaneously hoists Ao onto his shoulders as he has seemingly started to slowly lose his mind and runs off with her. Later on in a nearby park, Takumi finally cools down and confesses that he can't stand the weird vibe between them any longer, and with his eyes full of determination, Takumi leans close and boldly declares that he's going to make Ao fall in love with him. The next day, Ao discovers her grades have taken a nosedive. She literally faints from the shock. Fast forward to the summer, Ao books herself into a hotel renowned for its peaceful study environment, so she can fully dedicate herself to improving her grades. But just when she's settling in and ready to start studying, Takumi casually shows up and Ao practically faints again, but this time at the sight of Takumi's irresistible riz and surprisingly toned body. Takumi then invites Ao out for some fun on the beach, but she flatly refuses as she's determined to avoid any distractions. However, when Miyabi pops up out of nowhere, Ao mysteriously changes her mind and decides to join in on the fun, and since she didn't pack a swimsuit because she was supposed to be studying 24/7, Ao heads off with Miyabi to find the perfect one. But when Ao's choice of swimsuit is far too modest to attract any boys, Miyabi forces her to change into something more revealing. Shortly after, Ao shows off her new swimsuit to Takumi, which leaves him so utterly speechless he forgets how to speak Japanese. After that, the two head to the beach, but while enjoying the ocean, Ao boldly asks Takumi why he calls Miyabi by her first name, and Takumi explains that he already knows someone else with the same last name, and he simply wants to avoid mixing them up. However, Ao is unsatisfied with this answer, and instead decides to fish for compliments by getting Takumi's opinion on her swimsuit, and without skipping a beat, Takumi confesses that Ao looks so good that he doesn't want any other guy to see her and would much prefer if she wore one of those old-timey swimsuits instead, which flusters Ao beyond words. Unsure how to respond to such a comment, Ao awkwardly says the first thing that comes to mind and points out that they're all alone, unaware that their friends are creeping on them at that same moment. But upon realizing the implications of her own words, she immediately turns beet red and tries to distance herself, but Takumi catches up to her and asks her if this means she's ready now. Ao's mind starts racing as she believes Takumi is finally going to make his move on her, and the two will ascend to the world of adults together, so Ao embarrassingly declares that she's ready, but when Takumi starts carrying her back to land, Ao realizes that Takumi simply meant if she was ready to get out of the beach and go back to studying, leaving Ao completely flabbergasted by Takumi's stupidity and angry at herself for giving in to her impure thoughts. Ao, feeling like the universe is playing a cruel joke on her, spends the rest of the day furious and ends up too angry to even crack open a single book. She spends the entire night obsessing over why Takumi hasn't taken advantage of all the time she's practically thrown herself at him, and thinks that if she were in his shoes, they would have already done it several times over by now, because she's thirsty enough to drain an entire lake. But suddenly a devilish plan forms in her mind. She'll awaken the naughty beast inside Takumi, and just when he's ready to pounce, she'll turn him down. The next day, Ao rounds up every food item she can find that might help flip Takumi's switch, But while she's distracted with something else, Ao's father suddenly walks into the kitchen and, upon seeing these suspicious ingredients, he naturally assumes Ao is planning something dirty. So like any good dad, he decides to help by slipping in a special ingredient. The next day, Ao invites Takumi to a picnic, but Takumi is down in the dumps after a crushing loss in his soccer match, so the girls from the sidelines encourage Ao to go cheer him up while they head off to karaoke. Once finally alone with Takumi, Ao puts her plan in motion and gives Takumi the lunch she prepared, which instantly brightens his mood, but he then suddenly lunges at Ao and confesses that he doesn't know why, but he feels insanely hot all of a sudden. Seemingly out of nowhere, the two suddenly find themselves on the verge of finally crossing into a plot-filled paradise when Takumi pulls back, telling her she should leave because he's not feeling well. Ao, utterly frustrated, accidentally blurts out that she can't believe Takumi didn't go through with it again. In response, a flustered Takumi admits that he wants to do it too, but only if it's done with love. These words melt Ao's heart, and she realizes that she cares too much about Takumi to focus on anything else, so she puts on a brave face and tells him to never ask her out on a date again. Because she needs to focus on her studies. Later that night, Ao feels a heavy sadness about the decision she made but convinces herself it was for the best while seeking comfort in the arms of one of her father's special dolls. Meanwhile, Takumi is nose deep in a book, determined to get into the same university as his beloved Ao. The next day at school, Ao is shocked to find that Takumi has completely stopped talking to her even though she was the one who asked for it in the first place, and seeing Takumi suddenly treat her like a stranger hits like a ton of bricks, and her heart feels like it's been completely stomped on as she tries her best to shrug this off and focus on studying for the upcoming exam. When Ao returns home, she starts hitting the books with Yabe, but her thoughts keep drifting back to Takumi, and she can't concentrate for more than a minute, and upon seeing her lack of focus, Yabe decides that Ao needs a little punishment and forces her to wear an embarrassing maid outfit, for reasons that could only ever make sense in anime. Later that night, Takumi arrives at Ao's house and runs into Yabe, who warns him not to bother Ao since she's studying. Takumi, however, admits that he knows he's a bother, but he just needs to see her again one more time, and if she rejects him again, he'll finally give up for good. Impressed by his determination, Yabe decides to let Takumi in. Takumi then finds Ao in her room looking completely out of sorts and realizes that he's a bad influence on her, so he tells her that he'll leave her alone from now on because he loves her too much and turns to leave. As Ao's mind is flooded with dark thoughts and confusion, in a moment of desperation, Ao stops him and begs him to stay. Takumi's face lights up, and they share a heartfelt hug, but things quickly heat up and Ao soon finds herself completely overwhelmed when Takumi asks for permission to open her bento box. She surprisingly agrees and even grabs Takumi's hand, leading it straight to her plot, and as the two look passionately into each other's eyes, they're finally ready to level up. But of course, Ao's father ruins the moment by recording the whole thing like a creep. Takumi, mortified, apologizes profusely, but Ao's father tells him not to worry as he knows how it is with the young and in love. Before leaving, Takumi, thrilled that they're now closer than ever, announces that he has something important to ask her. Ao's heart races as she thinks Takumi is about to propose to her, and she accidentally blurts out a yes immediately, only to find out he's actually proposing they study together to get into the same university and says he'll hold back his feelings until then. Ao, disappointed but determined, sets a new goal to ace all her exams and finally do those special things with her beloved Takumi once they're both in college. A few weeks later, the class starts planning their sports festival, and although Ao is not exactly thrilled since she sucks at sports, when she overhears Takumi saying he's going to be a cheerleader, Ao perks right up as she begins picturing Takumi looking adorable in a male cheerleader uniform. When Ao returns home after school, she casually mentions the school festival to her dad, who, of course, immediately declares he's going to be there to support her, but Ao, knowing her dad's flair for the dramatic, quickly shuts this idea down since her father always manages to embarrass her in these kind of situations, and despite her dad swearing that he'll be on his best behavior this time, Ao isn't buying it and flat out tells him she doesn't want to see him there at all, which naturally sparks an argument, and the two part on pretty bad terms, and as days go by they give each other the silent treatment. Finally, the day of the festival arrives, and Ao feels a little down not seeing her dad in the crowd, and guilt creeps in as she regrets what she said to him. Just then, Takumi appears and notices something is off. Ao confesses that she had a fight with her dad, but Takumi reassures her that things will be fine. His words lift her spirits a bit, and she manages a small smile, but as Ao says goodbye to Takumi, her dad suddenly shows up, and in a moment of mutual honesty they both apologize and forgive each other by agreeing to put everything behind them. With that weight off her shoulders, Ao is now ready for her race. Fired up by her dad's unexpected support and Takumi's presence, she gives it her all, determined to win, and when her dad starts shouting inappropriate things about Ao's body, this makes her sprint faster just to shut him up, and she manages to win the race. Later in the infirmary, we find Ao's dad recovering from the results of some well-deserved beating from his daughter when Takumi drops by and, without missing a beat, Ao's dad suddenly asks Takumi if he liked what he said about Ao's body, which Takumi admits that he did, sending Ao into tears as she is overwhelmed with joyful emotions. Sometime later, Ao, in her usual overthinking mode, tells Takumi that maybe they shouldn't study together anymore because they both end up getting distracted, but in reality, Ao is just convinced that if they keep studying together, they'll end up exploring each other's plot. Takumi then asks if she's just worried about being alone with him, which Ao denies while trying to play it cool, so Takumi decides to casually invite her to study at his place over the weekend, mentioning that no one else will be home, which of course sends Ao's mind straight into the gutter, but she agrees to go anyway. Later that night, Ao, in a fit of excitement and nerves, hops online and orders some silk underwear just in case something happens. The next day, her special package arrives, and her father, of course, automatically assumes Ao bought some weird thing to wear for Takumi, which a flustered Ao quickly denies even though her father is right for once. Finally, the weekend arrives, and Ao heads over to Takumi's house. They dive into their books, and as the hours tick by, Ao starts to get antsy since Takumi hasn't made a single move yet. Desperation kicks in, so Ao starts dropping hints of her true desires, but it's like talking to a brick wall. Not want to give up easily, she switches tack and begins throwing out hints so obvious that they're basically neon signs, but unfortunately, Takumi is your typical oblivious anime character. Suddenly, Takumi, with completely innocent intentions, suggests that if they both ace their exams, they can each ask the other to do any one thing they want. Ao's mind begins racing with all the possibilities, and she eagerly asks Takumi what he would ask for. But to her surprise, Takumi simply says he'd ask her to make him another lunch, which leaves Ao utterly flabbergasted. Realizing that if she wants to do more plot-heavy things with Takumi, she's going to have to work for it. Ao suddenly becomes the most studious student as she's determined to ace those exams and finally get what she wants. But things take a turn for the worst when, in the middle of studying, Ao suddenly starts feeling ill from concentrating too hard, and as a result, she gets sick and misses the exams, which means she can't ask Takumi for anything. A few weeks later, Ao is chilling at an ice cream shop when she suddenly bumps into Miyabi, who's working there, and not wasting any time, Miyabi immediately asks if Ao has made any moves with Takumi during all this time they've been hanging out, but with a dramatic sigh, Ao admits that absolutely nothing has happened between them. So Miyabi advises her to just go for it and kiss him already instead of waiting for the clueless Takumi to make a move. On her way home, Ao starts overthinking as usual and decides she should try to be more pure like Takumi since he's apparently not interested in impure desires and is willing to wait until university. So the next day, Ao throws herself into studying, and Takumi can't help but notice that Ao doesn't act as wild and flustered as she usually did before. Later on, Takumi asks Ao if everything is okay, and although Ao tries to brush it off at first, she eventually spills the beans and confesses that she's disappointed they haven't even kissed yet. In response, Takumi asks if she wants to give kissing a try, which Ao agrees to while trying to keep her cool, but just as they're about to lock lips, Takumi suddenly changes his mind as he worries that they're not ready. But Ao seizes the moment and goes in for the kiss herself, which makes her so happy she nearly faints. Later that night, Ao absent-mindedly cooks her father too much food as she replays the memory of her first kiss in her head. The next day, Takumi approaches Ao, who is blushing like a tomato. Still flustered for what happened the day before, she can't help but wonder how Takumi got so good with his lips, and her mind spirals into jealousy as she convinces herself he must have smooched other girls before, and fueled by irrational jealousy, she storms off in a huff. In reality, Takumi's kissing skills are all thanks to the practice he had with his pillow, since Ao was actually his first real kiss too. After that embarrassing revelation, Ao and Takumi run into each other again in the library, but they decide to go somewhere more private to talk. There, they have a heart-to-heart conversation, and Ao embarrassingly confesses that it was her first kiss, fearful her lack of experience will make Takumi lose interest in her, but Takumi sheepishly admits that it was his first too. And with this, they make up, and Takumi cheekily steals another kiss as Ao realizes that she has no hope left to ever be able to focus on studying ever again.